as we said, we're going to be talking a little bit about PDFs and accessibility. Now, why is it important to know a little bit about PDFs when it comes to accessibility? Well, to help us with this, we're going to have our regular panel. But I think JP is going to be given some of the main information here. So maybe we can just invite our regular panel on. And just to get us started here, can we just explain a little bit what exactly are PDF documents? Why do people use PDFs?
Sure. Hi, Jude. So yeah, just to give us a bit of context, a bit of background, the PDF is short for a portable document format, and it's a file with the extension .pdf. So PDFs, they're typically used to share and view read-only documents, so while keeping the layout of the page. And it's probably fair to say that everyone listening will have come across PDFs at some time, or we use them quite regularly. I think about common uses for PDFs that include documents such as manuals and ebooks and application forms, even CVs, just to name a few. I suppose really the PDF was originally created by Adobe Systems, and this is actually going back nearly 30 years, back in the early 1990s. And it was the intention of Adobe Systems to do two things with the PDF. The first thing was that people should be able to open documents on any hardware or operating system without needing to have the app to create them. All you need is a PDF reader. And these days, most people will have either Adobe Reader or a web browser to fit the bill, so to speak. The second goal was that wherever you open a PDF, the layout of the document should look the same, so it keeps the formatting of the text and so forth. So this means that it gives us the PDF kind of a huge amount of kind of versatility. You can send a PDF document to someone on a Mac from a PC, and vice versa. You can send it from someone sending a PDF from a Mac back to a PC or a mobile phone, and it keeps the formatting and everything else. So it's a huge advantage there.
Yeah. So can you not do that with Microsoft Word, for example? Just give us an example of what would happen if I tried to do that with Microsoft
you
Word.
can. However, you could be sure that with Adobe using a PDF, sending a PDF file, it keeps the formatting. Plus, I suppose the other thing is that maybe not everyone has Microsoft Word. So whereas PDF Reader is freeware. So
I agree with JP there, Jude. You can spend a long time making a Word document accessible. You have to pull in legacy text boxes, you have to pull in legacy check boxes, you have to section off the document in different ways and protect certain parts and let other parts be editable, and it's very, very time consuming to get it right. And then like JP said, you could send that to somebody who's just using an iPhone, and they mightn't have Microsoft Word, and what way do they go about it? Maybe, I suppose I'm talking about in terms of if it was an editable form. But if you were, which is a common thing that is PDFs are used, or so if you were to send it to someone who only had an iPhone and they hadn't got Word, it kind of leaves them kind of stuck. And then PDFs are more universal, so you can download a PDF to any device and there'll be a PDF reader on that.
Yeah, very good. So that kind of gives a bit of a sense straight away that the PDF is almost like a universal reader in a way. So long as it's sort of translated into PDF, then it's fine.
I think that's going back to when these were created back in the early 90s. That was exactly the intention of Adobe Systems when they created these. It's interesting to go back when these were created. They were an idea from the co-founder of Adobe Systems, a man called John Warnock. He had the intention, I suppose, of moving Adobe Systems to a paperless office, so people wouldn't need to print documents. That's why he came up with this. So it started off as an internal project to create a file format so documents could spread throughout the company and displayed on any computer, on any operating system. And this went from there over the last 30 years. It's supposed to become so popular now.
Yeah, interesting. So that in itself, if we were to kind of leave the conversation there, it sounds straight away that this will always be, it sounds very inclusive. It sounds like something that's going to let everybody be able to read the content very easily. But then we come on to the idea of accessibility. Are PDFs accessible? if I used it as a broad question like that, is that a question that can be answered?
Yeah, it's a good question, and this really does come down to how the PDF files have been created. So PDFs are created by exporting documents from their native format into a PDF. So just to give you some examples, typically a PDF documents will be created in Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, or sometimes even Adobe InDesign. But really, it comes down to the native format of what's being where it was created. Okay. So yeah, exactly. Now, as another point as well as this to point out, is that many PDF files are simply images of text as well, that are created by just scanning hard copy documents, and that's obviously not great because they're not accessible. And
that's very frustrating because, like you were saying, somebody went to the trouble of making an original document that is digital. And somewhere down the line, somebody printed out that digital document and then scanned it back in and saved it as a PDF image. And therefore, all accessibility is lost and broken. So, I mean, that has no effect on a sighted person who might print out a document and fill out the form that way. But for someone who needs to access the information through a screen reader, that's, in the past, that was an absolute, full stop, that you were not going to be able to access that information. And luckily now there are ways around it. It's a band-aid, like it should be fixed at the source, but there is OCR modes with certain screen readers that can scan that PDF from a saved file and then produce the text digitally for a screen reader.
So it's almost, if we were to describe that to somebody, I guess it's kind of like somebody's taken a photograph of text, but the device doesn't understand what the text is. It's like before we learned to read and write, I guess. If you were to look at a page of text, you wouldn't understand actually what it's talking about. You'd see it, but you wouldn't understand it.
And the screen reader's just going to read out like graphic or unlabeled graphic, and all the information in it's lost. Well, it was in the past. Now there is ways, like I said, we can OCR it. Or even in the past, people might have had to print out that document and then put it in a scanner and use software like Kurzweil. But now it can be done from the system itself, which is what it is.
Just to add into that explanation there, when you mention OCR, just tell us a small little bit about OCR. What is OCR?
Optical character recognition. So it's a digital way of scanning a document. Like in the past, like libraries would have used it in the past to scan old books to make digital copies, and you'll often hear people saying, I have the OCR version of such and such a book. And I know that because there might be a certain mistake in it, but it's gotten so much better since then, and the technology's become so much more portable. Like people would have had scanners or SARA machines or large devices in the past that you would have to put a document in and 10 or 15 seconds scanning it and then reading back. Now we have like Seeing AI on our phone, which one snap and we have that document read back to us.
Yes.
A popular thing in the past, Sean, just to let people, I suppose, understand what happened, is in offices, somebody would request, some information to be emailed out to them, or, a form maybe to be emailed out to them. And, usually somebody in the office, there's one actually printed, that's being printed off, stick it in the scanner, scan that onto a USB. Went back to the computer and emailed it out, and that's where an awful lot of these documents, I suppose, came into existence, that when they hit a screen reader, then you're just getting that image message the whole time.
Yes, so it's kind of circular as well, isn't it? Because it's like it starts digital, goes into hard copy, and then ends up digital again, but not particularly good digital.
And that even makes it harder to edit then when that becomes people's first version of that document, because it's an image, you can't go in and change it, you can't go in and rearrange it. While if you can locate the original document, which is digital, it allows the end user to do so much more with it.
And Joe here, Jude. Also, the JAWS brought in the OCR feature, and that's what it's most used for. That actually, reading inaccessible PDFs. Sometimes JAWS will automatically call back to you if it's inaccessible, and offer to OCR the document for you, and if it doesn't, you can just press the applications key and go down and OCR the document. I think JP actually covered it in a previous live event. There's a video out there, but so that's not the way around it. But
definitely best to go back to the source, and best practice there and making it accessible from the start. But yeah, as Joe said, you definitely there's the option to use the convenient OCR in JAWS. And as far as I know, the more recent version of JAWS, I think it's 2018. Certainly, you're prompted with a message to say that you can perform the convenient OCR on the document that is an image file.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so just from that perspective then, because that might be something that people have heard a little bit, maybe if they've got JAWS and they've had the prompt coming up about that. What else might somebody see? Let's say they've got an accessible PDF document in front of them and then one that's not accessible. What's the difference?
Sure. Well, I suppose essentially a PDF document is considered accessible if it can be used by anyone. For people with sight loss, the PDF should be fully accessible, obviously using assistive software. I say it could be JAWS, it could be NVDA, be VoiceOver on your iPhone, your iPad, or also with screen magnification software. So it's that's ultimately the difference is making it accessible to everyone. But there are obviously things that we can do to make an accessible PDF accessible as well.
Yeah. So how would you go about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's possible to check the accessibility of a PDF document and make the changes that are needed using software. Adobe Acrobat Professional. It's something that we do here in NCBI. The labs team are quite involved with this kind of work. So if we take a look at some of the characteristics of an accessible PDF, and this is obviously an exhaustive list, but some of the examples, it might include things like one very important thing would be a logical reading order. So this is the order in which a screen reader reads out the content in the document. So this often would find needs to be adjusted. So to say, for example, if we open a PDF and the screen reader straight away reads out maybe an item halfway down the page, it could be an image file or maybe some text or a paragraph that's not at the top of the page, then this will need to be reordered in Adobe Acrobat Professional. So that's one very, very kind of, I suppose, important thing to fix, just kind of a logical reading order so that the text is read from the top of the page downwards.
Yes.
But there's plenty of other things. I mean, to give you some other example is another thing that kind of characteristic that we'll be looking at for is make sure that there's alternative text or alt text included for all the images. So this will be provided for any images featured in the PDF. So the screen reader user can understand the message that's conveyed in the images that are featured. The idea here is that the text inserted should be kind of quite succinct and accurate, so not too kind of long-winded. We don't want a full description of everything going on, but just keeping it quite succinct, concise. And we find this could be particularly useful if there's a graph or maybe some infographic on the PDF that there needs to be an alt text attribute for.
So a little kind of summary description almost of what.
Exactly. Yeah. Other things that we'd look out for would be a heading structure. So screen reader user would often use a heading structure to navigate the content of the PDF. This would include headings, so headings like heading 1, heading 2, and so forth. It just makes it easier, much more straightforward to navigate the PDF using the screen reader. Very, very useful in long documents. I'm just thinking, one example would be our weekly technology newsletter. So maybe someone is interested in going to an article, maybe 2 or 3 articles into the newsletter. They want to get to that one, they can just press H, for example, if they're going to want to go to that one. But there are other examples. For example, our Insight magazine, our quarterly newsletter, they can press H to go to the next heading and the next heading. That's where the heading structure comes into play.
I think with the layout, a lot of the PDFs are made by graphic designers, and they're bringing in like maybe the images first and then bringing in the spaces they want to put text in, and then they're populating that text. So as each thing gets brought in sequentially, it's giving a reading order because the screen the PDF thinks that that's going to be the first thing and that's going to be the second thing, even though you've placed it midway or near the bottom of the screen. So that's why JP is talking about going in and then manually rechanging that reading order.
Yeah.
So the graphic designer is making a digital copy, but he is also putting in order error in terms of what a computer would see. So that has to be fixed afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, actually, because unless somebody comes from a background where they've been working with accessibility, or maybe a programming background or something, you're not necessarily going to intuitively know what the logical reading order is, because it's different from how it looks.
I think the point of like sort of discussions like this is to give our listeners an idea of what the problem is, so they can also report it back confidently to people and say, well, it is digital and I can read it, but it's completely, all over the shop in terms of it doesn't make any sense because it's reading this part of the article first and this part of the article second.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's allowing people to sort of at least have the knowledge of why it's doing that.
Yeah. So when you described there just how a PDF document can be made accessible, is that something, you mentioned a particular piece of software, but is that something that anybody could do at home, or do you need to have a bit more of background and a bit of training as to how to make a PDF document accessible?
You would need the application to see and break down the document into the reading order and the heading structure and the alt text.
Right.
So that not everyone will be able to do that at home, and also it's a very visual thing because you're looking at the elements on the screen and looking at the current reading order and then having to change that order. So there's no way for a non-sighted person to fix this as of yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's important to know as well.
Yeah, which is something that that hopefully in the future that they can kind of find a work around that, because at the minute you visually have to see, oh, that's got reading order 7, but yeah, that's the first thing on the page. That should be reading order 1.
Yes. Yeah. So in other words, if I've got vision but I don't have the right package, I can't do the job. And if I've got the right package but I don't have any vision, I can't do the job. It needs to be, you need to have to kind of know how to be able to make a PDF accessible if it's not already.
Yeah, and hopefully in the future that'll change.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me something, when it comes to actually creating a PDF document, let's say somebody is making it from the start and they're trying to make sure it's accessible. Is it left to the creator of that document to work out how to make it accessible, what works best, or are there certain accessibility standards that a PDF document should adhere to?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, it's a good question. The important thing here is to note that, regardless of the origin of the document, it is best to ensure that it's accessible in its native format before it's exported to PDF. But then there are certain accessibility standards that a PDF document could adhere to, which is something could definitely be worth checking out for someone who is assessing a PDF, the accessibility of a PDF. Yeah. So to just give you a couple of some information about that, there are accessibility guidelines that are actually available from 2 separate organizations, which actually recommend how to make PDF documents accessible. Just for starters, there is the International Organization for Standardization, or what's known as the ISO, and they've made available what's called the PDF UA, which is Portable Document Format Universal Accessibility. And these were produced, I think it's about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Basically, it's a document from the ISO that contains recommendations on making your PDF document accessible. But to complement this, there's also Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0, and more recently WCAG 2.1, which was released in, I think it was June 2018. And I think a lot of people listening in might be familiar with this. These are guidelines that have been produced or developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. Now, I think a lot of people listening in will be familiar with W3C because they have the goal of making web pages and web applications more accessible, but not everyone might know that they actually have guidelines in relation to making PDF documents accessible too. Yeah, which is interesting. So they use, like, if you look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, they provide a list of testable, what are called success criteria for making PDFs accessible. And what's more, they actually help determine the PDF's conformance level as well. So it could be A, AA, or AAA rated, with AAA being the kind of gold standard, what everyone wants to strive towards. It kind of works a little bit similar, I think, I find, to like the BER rating of a house. Your energy rating, where you have A is best, obviously, and that's kind of how it works. So everyone will ideally every document should be AAA rated. But there are there's a huge list of these success criteria that are available online from the W3C website. To give you an example, like I was looking at earlier, there is success criteria. I think it's success criteria 2.4.10, and it covers section headings. It says section headings are used to organize the content of the PDF document. So you can more or less check that off if you have that in place. Move on to the next one. So it's quite an extensive list.
Yeah. Like a checklist to work to. So is that like when NCBI are doing something like Insight Magazine?
Yeah.
That's how it's followed, is it?
Exactly. So then we can give it a statement of conformance to say this PDF meets accessibility guidelines set out by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. That's
okay. So what if people are still having an issue maybe reading a document that should be accessible like that? Is there something that might cause that?
Yeah, a thing like that, Jude, is sometimes when you're navigating on your computer in a Windows environment and you navigate to the PDF, it actually, browsers are trying to be helpful to everyone, so it actually opens in the browser.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes strip away the accessibility, or the browser itself isn't supporting that accessibility. So if there ever is a PDF online, it's recommended for PC and laptop users is to download it. You can shift F10 over that link and save as and save that wherever you like. And when you open it with Acrobat Reader, all that accessibility functions are there.
Very good. Yeah. So if somebody has been having any issues with something like Insight Magazine, for example, just try and make sure that it's downloaded is the key thing.
Absolutely. I think it'd be great to get some more feedback from end users. And I know people in the past used to get it in a Word document and sort of other versions, and like obviously it'll always be done in Braille and things like that. But with the Word version, like we were saying at the start of the chat here, was like we're limiting the people who can access that because it's not universal. Like someone on an iPad, someone on an iPhone, that might be their only device because they're so, a phone now is so multifaceted that you can do everything on it. So you might not feel the need to ever buy a laptop. And then if we send out a Word document to people as our main version of a magazine, we're sort of cutting off people from being able to use it. So even on your phone, it's going to have a PDF reader, and it'd be worth knowing how well that can interact with the accessibility features within the document, because like JP said, you can put in the heading structure, you can navigate through the document much quicker.
Yeah. Excellent. So if anybody does have some feedback that you can give us on that, that's excellent. We love to get feedback, particularly with if you let us know what system you're using, what device you're using, and what the difficulties are if you've got any difficulties. But of course, let us know if it is working well as well, and that helps us in our development.
Yeah.
Very good. So one of the things that maybe people might think about with PDFs is the use of forms. Now, a lot of people might come up with maybe a form on a Word document. We've spoken before about the general thing of the difference between Word and PDF, but why is a PDF a good option for even things like forms which need to be editable?
PDF's a good option there because if you spend time and make it accessible and you put in the text fields, like I said, it's not just on a computer you can navigate to these fields. It would also be on your phone or portable device or whatever device you are using. So you're able to fill out that form and then email it back to whoever is compiling it or compiling that information. But likewise, that's a very good way of doing it. It's better than Microsoft Word, it's better than other versions, but an online form is better for everybody.
Okay. So explain the difference there a little bit. So you're talking about an online form that is it. So in this case, we are talking about getting access to it via a browser.
Yeah, so if we were to email a form out to someone and we created it in Microsoft Forms, we're fairly confident that all features within that form are accessible. So therefore, whatever device it goes to, like we're not going backwards through that, creating that form, then making it accessible, then sending it out. So from our point of view, it saves a lot of time. From the end user's point of view, it's straight away, you get the form in the email, you click it, you're browsing through your browser, you're quite familiar with that. Yeah. And from our point of view is we're not actually receiving loads of forms and emails and then compiling it. It's all been compiled under one sort of location.
Yeah. Very good.
So they're like in the hierarchy of things, like PDFs are really, really high, but if it comes to a form, maybe an online form is better.
Yeah. Very good. That's good to know as well. So just with all of these different aspects of PDFs, obviously not everybody, if we weren't familiar with them beforehand, we're not going to remember every aspect of this. But if we are in the situation of needing to make a PDF document accessible, who could somebody contact if they wanted to make a PDF document accessible?
Yeah, well, this is a service that NCBI Labs provides. So we do regularly check our kind of internally produced PDF documents. We mentioned the Insight magazine earlier on, but we also do this for several public and private companies too. So they can just send an email to labs@ncbi.ie. So if you have any kind of queries regarding making a PDF accessible, you can just email ourselves and we can check it out for you.
Perfect. Very good. Thank you very much, JP and Daniel, Sean and Joe as well, for your input into that. It's one of those subjects that, while it might not sound the most exciting to start with the idea of PDFs, actually because we use them so much, it's important to have a little bit of a concept about what makes them work, and if we're having difficulties, why that might be. So appreciate your input into that, and that's very helpful. Now, if anybody does have any questions relating to any of the subjects we're talking about today, so PDFs particularly at the moment, please do send us in your questions. So you can use the panel on the right hand side. If you're using Microsoft Teams, you can send us a question there, or you can email us at labs@ncbi.ie.